Oh, peddlers, we meet again. What is going on? I hope you all enjoyed that Grand Prix as much as I did, but this is getting a bit bonkers. I didn't intend once again to come on and have another impromptu session. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Drop me anybody that's listening. If you are live, as I am live, then drop me a cheeky one in the chat. This is bonkers, man. I didn't intend to come back and have to talk about the Suzuka Grand Prix in memoriam. But it took off, didn't it? It was combustible, it was chaotic, and we've got to talk about it. In summary, 3 points in particular: Checo Perez, the FIA, and George Russell. We did them in reverse order because it's techie. This George Russell business and Lewis Hamilton, of course it was always going to happen. This, comrades, peddlers, was inevitable. It was always going to come to this, and I feel like there is worse around the corner. But let's talk to what happened in particular around this Grand Prix between Messrs Russell and Hamilton, because it got awfully techie, didn't it? So go on, split strategies. On lap 16, this is what happens. And again, you will cast your minds back to 2021 Brazil, where Max Verstappen did a similarly overly aggressive overcrowd when it came to Lewis Hamilton. Even the piece of the track looks the same as turn 4 Brazil. It's eerie almost. George Russell's not liking that though, is he? They've already had one dalliance already this Grand Prix as George overtook Mr. Lewis Hamilton in the return leg. This is how strongly and how aggressively Lewis defends to George. What's going on, Smesh? How come no one talked about the 6 second? I know. Apparently it was immaterial. Smesh, we'll get to that. I'll try and get to it. Patrick, Lewis should have put George into the bleachers. Well, he did. Patrick, look at the picture, mate. Something in the rules, if my memory serves correctly, when I studied the whole rigmarole around Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, very similar incident, 2021, Brazil, turn 4. The wording in the Sporting Code of Conduct is something like you cannot be overly aggressive when defending somebody on the outside. What you can do, you can use the outside as a defender. You can. If you have the inside line, the rules, in my mind, the old school rules, have always been that you can hang somebody out to dry if you have the inside line, but you can't do it too aggressively. Now, a question for the panel. Is that too aggressive? I don't know. We all said that Max Verstappen was too aggressive at turn 4. I mean, you could argue the fact that because Lewis has got 4 wheels off the track, is that too aggressive? Ultimately, the stewards do what the stewards do, and they're consistently inconsistent once again. That, though, is techie, and here's why that's techie, because these are Mercedes drivers, and Mercedes always let their drivers race, but there is an equal and opposite downside to running that philosophy that we all love as racing fans, isn't there? One day these guys are going to come together. In fact, they did touch. It was a marginal touch, and there was no damage caused this Grand Prix, but they did come together, ironically, at the Suzuka Grand Prix, the first of which Toto Wolff isn't present. Techie. That's techie, guys. I'm telling you, that's techie, and it only gets techier. And listen, let's do context. Let's cast our mind back not less than 7 days prior, where at the Singapore Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton in the closing stages of that Grand Prix had more pace than his teammate George Russell. This context is really, really important, because if we put on our Sir Lewis Hamilton caps on for a second, Lewis subliminally was told to stand down at Singapore. Told, kind of. That's what he did anyway. I don't think he attacked George Russell as wholeheartedly and fervently as he could have with that additional pace and the additional tyres that he had. We're talking in the closing stages of Singapore Grand Prix. So George got a blythe for my money. He was given carte blanche. He was tier 1. He was the apex predator in that Mercedes car, and he was given leeway, using which he could go and have a nibble at Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz ahead of him. Okay, so he beached it, but nevertheless, that's really, really important for this because context is key. And the reaction that millions of F1 fans around the world, particularly Sir Lewis Hamilton fans, have had is a function of that context. So here's what happens next. George Russell, being the god-tier strategist that he is, goes against Mercedes. And I don't hate this. I admire this from George, and I've done a couple of videos about George Russell. Ultimately, this chap is an F1 driver. He comes to every race weekend not looking to win less than 25 points. And I don't hate that. That's what F1 drivers are there to do. I would dislike it if it were anything else. Fair play to George for that attitude. And Lewis Hamilton fans around the world have detested that, have come to hate him for that because of the equal and opposite downside effect that that has on their driver, Sir Lewis Hamilton. Zero-sum game is this thing that we call F1. So I don't necessarily hate that. But here's where it gets techie. George decides to play a joker of a strategic card. What's going on, old fart? Patrick. Smash. It is techie. Corn, what's going on? No harm, no foul in that first manoeuvre. I think they were racing. Is a summary in all this. But here's where it gets techie. George Russell decides he's going to go rogue, play a full joker. Around here, traditionally, the strategy that gets you quickest from lights the flag to stop. George Russell is having it easy on his first set of tyres, decides to push him out and decides to one stop. That costs him at the end when his teammate, Messer Hamilton, ultimately has more pace, a function of having more tyres underneath him because he does the apex predator, the conventional quicker strategy at Singapore and does a two-stopper. Lewis is on a charge with Messer Carlos Sainz behind him. At which point, what does George Russell say? George Russell does the only thing that George Russell knows how to. Now he wants to play the team game, now that he doesn't have pace or wheels underneath him. He's in saying that as consistently inconsistent as the FIA stewards. It seems apparent to me at this point, and again, this is in keeping with the F1 racing driver who has agency only at the forefront of his mind. It seems that George is quick to leverage the team ethos when it suits him, right? And once again, we see that at the Suzuka Grand Prix. Earlier on, his message, let me flip back to it real quick. What are we doing? Are we racing each other? Who do we want to fight here, said George Russell, lap 16, when Lewis hung him out. Okay, so it was super aggressive. And I don't hate this query from George, I will be honest. Who do you want to fight here? Each other or the others? Cool. So this is the team ethos that we're talking about now. I've got the faster car. What are we doing? You're going to let me by, or are we going to hinder each other and take chunks out of each other? And I don't hate that, Kidney Super. What's going on? Yeah, I'm good, bruv. Early morning this morning, but you know what? This is the life of an F1 content creator. All right, look. George Russell says that, and I don't hate that. Cool. But then later on in the Grand Prix, we get the secondary instance, right? When Lewis Hamilton, so we're going to play the team game in this instance on lap 16. But now when Lewis Hamilton has got pace on George, just like he did at the Singapore Grand Prix, now we're looking to leverage said pace advantage in our favour, George? Is that what we're doing? Surely the team game in this instance, in the latter stages of the Grand Prix, is to get your ass out the way and let Lewis crack on, if indeed, as we know he did, have so much more pace in hand, just as he did at the Singapore Grand Prix. And of course, the F1 Twitter sphere absolutely erupts. Everybody loses their mind. Oh my God, George is a snake. How dare George intervene with the progress of the 8-time champion? How dare George? I hear it. I'm split, peddlers. I will be honest with you. I don't know which side of that. I don't like it. Listen, if you're going to be an Ayrton Senna type racer and want to race, then let's race. And when you're slow, do you know what I mean? Make a decision. if you're going to be a team player all the time, then keep that same energy. I just don't like sometimes. I don't think George Russell is a snake. That's too harsh a label. But sometimes he is consistent in his inconsistency. That's just the truth. It's almost like you want him to keep the same energy when he's quick, when he has the pace advantage, as when he's slow and when Lewis has the pace advantage, because sometimes it feels a bit inconsistent. There are discrepancies. What's going on, Samir? I hope you're good, man. Yeah, big up love to the F1 community, who are all super fuming right now at the behaviour of George Russell. So that kicks off, and then he's ultimately ordered, he gets a team order to give up the position to Sir Lewis Hamilton on quicker tyres, in a quicker machine at that point, fresher tyres into turn one, does it, and ultimately that leads to his demise versus Carlos Sainz Jr., against whom he no longer has the pace to deal with it. Now, George's suggestion, contrary to the team order, was no, let's not do the switcheroo just yet. What we need to do, said George, is exactly what Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz did at the Singapore Grand Prix. Let's leverage DRS, work together, try and build a gap to Carlos Sainz for the team, says George. And I just don't think that was realistic here. I think so big was his delta, was the favourable delta that Carlos Sainz had over George Russell. At this race, sadly, George, I don't think that was realistic. I think in instituting your suggestion, both Mercedes risked getting caught and being overtaken by Carlos Sainz, and ultimately that would have been a greater net downside to Mercedes' total haul for the constructors. And apparently that's all that what they're concerned with, right? Exactly this smash. Hit the like, subscribe if you're not already. I'm going to try and start to do more of these lives as the season gets techier, because apparently you guys appreciate them. Patrick said there's fair play, and then there is George. Oh my goodness. It's peak for George. And I'm going to say this again. I don't think George is a bad guy. I don't think you can hate George for 1 in 25 points from a race weekend. How could he be an F1 driver and things be any different? They're selfish in their very nature. This is their DNA, the fundamental constitution of an F1 driver. Selfishness is wound deep into their fabric. I can't hate it. But you got to be a bit consistent, George. It's your agency is too transparent now, and it will put people off of you. This dude, he nails the PR right, and he did accordingly. And he's in the post-race scrum, he said all the right things. Listen, all of what I said in the car was a bit of a rush of blood to the head. It's an endurance race. I was tired. We were going back and forth. All I want is for the team to do well. Tick. That's the exam answer, George. But your verbal, sometimes between your verbal, there is a mismatch versus your action. And that's the problem that millions of people have around the world, particularly Team LH. Now, I don't want George Russell. George Russell has no... he owes no favours to Lewis Hamilton, in my humble opinion. I don't want him to be wiping Lewis Hamilton's butt. That's not what I'm asking, or carrying Lewis Hamilton's cape behind him. That's not what I'm asking for George. That's unreasonable. What I am asking from George, however, is for him to just be a bit more consistent, you know? Just a bit more consistent, not necessarily in his exam answer. He will always nail the PR afterwards. And he said all the right things. He spoke with contrition, not quite repentance, but humility. And that was all important, yeah. But what I will say is this. Actions speak louder than words, eh? Especially in this context. Bloody Dora, George. Get out the way, son. Get out the way. There's a time and a place. And even to evoke, he knew this wasn't Singapore. It was a very different circumstance to Lando and Carlos at Singapore. You had less pace. There were more laps to the end of the race as well. It was techie, this one was. I just don't think it was fair, George. You're not comparing apples with apples. So I feel like sometimes there is a time not to be a crab in a bucket. It can't always be about you, George. And I'm glad that in the post race presses he kind of acted accordingly, right? Contrition. Lewis Hamilton, on the other hand, similarly contrite, eh? It was all about the team post race. It was all about, okay, so there was a bit of a Freudian drip feed. He did say, listen, I'm fighting for Peter and I'm a long way ahead of George. I just want to get the most points for the team. But there wasn't beef. Oh, there was another cheeky soundbite from Mr. Hamilton where he said something to the effect of, we're going to talk offline. He wasn't happy, was he? He wasn't happy. You will never hear it. He will never he will never vocalize it in front of the world's press. Not anymore. That's Lewis of like 2007, 2008. You will get sound bites from the fella then. Not anymore though. He's more measured and considered in everything he says to the media because he understands the potentially wider ramifications and the downside impact on the team morale if he starts opening his mouth and criticising George as I think he wanted to. I kind of see it in his face. He wasn't too happy, was he? But Lewis is more focused on the delta that Red Bull have over Mercedes. He said something to the effect of the team's going to have to develop the car at a rate that they've never developed the car before. And that's a solemn soundbite. But sadly for Mercedes fans around the world, that's where we are. And F1 fans around the world who want competition from their F1 season. Because at the moment, Red Bull are a gazillion miles ahead. Let's see where... Max Verstappen finished 20 seconds down the road. I think that's conservative estimates. He'd long turned down his engine and was minding temperatures right. No way was he going at 10 tenths there. I think that could have been upwards of 60 seconds. Gun to the head, Max Verstappen would have put in excess of a minute on the rest of the field, which is techie. Good news story though, McLaren are catching, and I don't hate that. Lovely little interaction battle between Norris and Piastri. Oscar Piastri is nobody's fool, not to be messed about with, but I'm not going to jump on the hype train just yet. I had a massive argument with my boy Tomo and my boy Shez about the uppermost potential ceiling of Piastri versus Norris. I still think Norris is that guy. Put some respect on his name. What Norris has over Piastri currently for me, not necessarily speed, but his ability to race manage, to put together a race. Lando Norris has that experience and that capability, yet and still over Oscar Piastri. That's the truth of it. Penultimate point of the afternoon. Checo Perez, what's he doing, man? This is bonkers. Checo, you can't be so clumsy. Checo's in a funny, he's in a kind of self-perpetuating downward spiral at the moment, isn't he? He just needs a crumb, something to hang on to, a cheeky race win or even a podium that can somehow about turn this downward momentum that he's just in. And it's inexplicable, right? What happened? What's the turning point? I don't know. Yeah, the rocket ship smash. No, it is a rocket ship. Smash. I'll make that point very quickly before I go back to Checo Perez. If we are doing a thought experiment, you're fair to... So the rocket ship thesis is thus, or so I hear it, perpetuated so often in social media. Max is only winning... He's only so dominant because of the RB19 being a rocket ship, and I just don't think that's fair. That's not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. You can say that if you want to, but that's not the whole truth. Now, if I put on my accounting cap on again, my very boring noddy accounting cap, I sit in month-end meetings every single month-end. And we've got to go through variances and parse out all of the different contributants, right? And there's never just one. There will be a big one, and you might want to argue that the biggest explain in the dominance of Max Verstappen this year is the RB19. But that's not the start and the finish of the story, is my point. It's more than that. And it has to be more than that by virtue of the fact that Checo Perez is DNFing and can't even make it through to Q2 half the bloody time. That's the fair test, right? It can't just be that it's the RB19. There has to be more flesh, more ingredients in that causal cake. Can't just be that. And I think Max is doing a phenomenal job. Maybe better than he would be if there were adversity and pressure, but that's all hypothetical, and I don't want to indulge in that conjecture at this point. Max is killing it. Did you see the lap yesterday? Smash, bloody Norris. Sector 1. Sector 1 looked like a simulation. Just crazy levels of ability. But yeah, what's going on with Checo Perez? I don't have the answer to that, but he needs to turn it around soon. The move on K-Mag was just like... The move on K-Mag reminded me of a move that I would make on F123, and I'm a novice. Checo Perez in that car... If you're going to talk about rocket ship, I think we want to frame it in the Checo Perez conversation, because Checo Perez in that car shouldn't be so far away from Max Verstappen. Shouldn't be underperforming. If Max is outperforming the car in the package, Checo Perez is absolutely underperforming it. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. 8-time tongue-in-cheek, Louis. 8-time, although there's a couple of videos going around. People keep on making that Freudian slip. Charles Leclerc said it. Lando said it. Broadcasters have said it. Ted Kravitz has said it 8 times. So it's not just me making the Freudian slip. David has it. Checo's falling away. Not as bad on a Sunday. He's techie with Checo. I don't know what he needs to do. I made a video saying the things that... okay, here's what I think Checo needs to do. I think he needs to get out of his own way first and foremost. Now, people have talked about his helmet marker in particular in very racially driven undertones, which absolutely is not acceptable. But I think there is something to be said for Checo Perez's commitment to the game. Like, he's not... I don't want to fat shame anyone, but he looks like he's got a couple excess pounds on him, doesn't he? I mean, if you look at, like, I don't know, if you look at Max and Lewis and George, they're all super slender, like no kilos left unturned. And Checo does look like he carries, I know he's very, very short, and so maybe he can afford to, right? But I think he carries a couple extra pounds. I think there's something to be said for Checo Perez's focus and his ability to kind of block out all the noise, right? Well, you're not performing like Max Verstappen. Your driving style, the stuff with helmet Marco, the speculation about his driving seat going forward, that's all tough, right? And that can all drip feed through to somebody's driving style and Checo's ability to get from lights to flag in the quickest time. I understand that. I get it. But Checo's got to do something to unwind, to reverse and about turn this negative down spiral, because it's self-perpetuating and it's bad for all parties, man. It is bad for all parties. Of course, he's got a contract for next year, but will they be looking towards Lando potentially for that seat? That's what I'm hearing, and that's the rumour that's gathering as much pace as Checo Perez's downward spiral at the moment. So I wouldn't be surprised, which is sad for Checo, because he's a good driver. If he was rubbish, then do you know what I mean? Nobody would care, but Checo's got to, man. Nobody can tell me any different. And then finally, let's talk about the FIA. Consistently inconsistent, as per usual. Consistently inconsistent. Are they as inconsistent as they are incompetent? All the ins there, Cameron. Tongue twister, if ever I heard one. I'm not... Okay, here's what happened. So Checo Perez, they've retired the car initially, but he's got a penalty, hasn't he, for all of his indiscretions. I think this one's for the particularly clumsy manoeuvre up the inside of K-Mag. Absolutely atrocious. And there was many more, wasn't there? There was the bloody sudden left turn on that nearly took out Lewis on the start. There was loads of them. He couldn't keep his nose clean. And that's pretty much all you need to do in that car. And that's why Max Verstappen is worthy of praise, right? Because he does everything he needs to do in that car to keep his nose clean, away from trouble and danger, like he did off the start with a very clever pincer move by the two boys in the papaya-coloured car, which I didn't hate. I definitely didn't hate that manoeuvre. That's what I was expecting from Mr. Bottas in Mexico. Remember when Bottas just had to cover Max Verstappen around the outside and failed to do so? And on that occasion, the Mercedes boys were 1 and 2, not 2 and 3. So that Piastri and Lando managed to at least ply the pincer manoeuvre where bloody Bottas failed to do so in 21 is worthy of praise. The two McLaren boys to be commended for that. Checo Perez, here's what happens with Checo. Checo Perez retires but then gets a penalty. I didn't realise that this was a thing because it's happened before where Sargent's retired and they haven't rolled forward his penalty. That has happened before. Red Bull, being the savvy, street smart team that they are, get on the phone via Jonathan Wheatley to the stewards and say, listen, I know he's got penalties. Are you going to roll these forward to the next Grand Prix 2 weeks from now? To which I'm assuming the stewards respond, yeah, we're going to roll them forward. All right, so if we unretire the car and run him round for a bit, why don't you apply the penalty that he's received today at Suzuka, rather than roll the penalty forward? The stewards respond in the affirmative. You go ahead, Jonathan, unretire him. So that's exactly what Red Bull do. They unretire the car and they have Checo Perez running around 7 laps adrift of the race leaders, just so that next race weekend in 2 weeks' time, he doesn't have a 5 or 10 second penalty applied to him then. Smart from Red Bull. But then we find out afterwards that the FIA and the stewards, being the FIA and the stewards, they've rescinded on whatever conversation they had with Jonathan Wheatley. There is a loophole in the rules, and as millions of fans all around the world have been saying for the longest time, you need to rewrite the rules, FIA, so it's clear and transparent and everyone can understand them. They say, you know what, mea culpa, we have a loophole in the regs as they're currently written, and so Checo Perez is still going to carry forward his 5 or 10 second penalty, even though we said that he wouldn't have to. What are we doing? I am so tired of this, guys and girls. I'm telling you, the FIA are going to need to get your house in order, FIA. Giving you the playbook going forward. Here's the solve. More stewards, competent, full-time ones, carry them over the 23-24 race weekend, or at least have a core of stewards who can work every single race weekend, right? It shouldn't just be like, this is ridiculous, right? Did you see the list of stewards? I recognised none of their names, and now maybe that speaks more to my knowledge of the situation or lack thereof. But I'm pretty sure there was no carryover from Singapore. It's a completely new set of stewards. And that's all right, okay, and that's all right if there are more than 3 stewards. You can't have 3 stewards. That's too small a sample size to reduce the number of anomalous/erroneous judging decisions. I said it on the stream yesterday. Each and every single time, whether it's in business or, I don't know, school whatever organisation, if there is an entity, a group of people that need to make important decisions, the way that you ensure that there are no gaps, no black holes, no bottlenecks in the robustness of that sound decision-making process is to have more than 3 bloody people. 3 people is too small a number to ensure against erroneous decision-making. The process is it's flawed fundamentally. And if we take a step back, right, there are too many in this process. There are far too many bottlenecks and potential tropiezos, aka stumbling blocks. Firstly, the rules aren't fantastically well written. There are no terms and conditions in the rules, as an example, so there is assumed knowledge. The rules should be written, in my humble opinion, as if you should be able to give them to my grandma, and she should be able to apply them. They need to be written in that type of language, and if they're not, that's where you have the terms and conditions, terms and definitions even up front in the preface. Like, what are we doing? This is nonsense. This is a multi-billion-dollar sport. So what are we doing? That's your first protocol. Second protocol, your second phase of, what's the word that I'm looking for? Your second phase of safety net, as far as like the regulations are concerned. once you've rewritten the rules. Have more stewards. Done. It's not that complicated. And thirdly, lastly from me, wherever possible, take humans out of the situation. If there's AI, but particularly on track infringements, why aren't there sensors? Get somebody to bloody code it. Like what are we doing? This is just completely, it's nuts. Remove humans wherever possible. You're never going to be able to do it 100% right because of the nature of F1. Adjudicating F1 is always going to be a shades of grey type thing. It's never going to be just black and white. Like there's two, do you know what I mean? Like in incidents between George and Lewis, for example, today, are you going to use precedents? Like, are you going to take the context into mind more broadly? Like, how are you going to do it? So there needs to be an element of human, but reduce that element of human. The way that you do that is rewriting the rules in a way that's explicit and transparent and easy for everybody, even my grandma, to understand. There you go. Plus more stewards. This isn't good enough, man. Like, what are we doing after the blood? Like, what are we doing? There's a loophole in the rules, and we've only just realised that now. So null and void any conversation that we had previously. What are we doing, man? This is a joke. One of the greatest sports in the world, bottlenecked by a regulatory body that can't regulate. What? Yeah, of course. Cheers, lads, because that makes sense. I'm baffled. Every single time, and this is going to keep happening, by the way, and every single time it happens, the world of the F1 community more broadly just recalls into itself like, what's the point? What are we doing here? You don't even know. You're meant to be implementing and instituting a rule set, yet the rule book that lays out said rules is incomplete. Get your house in order, FIA. In the off season, you got some work to do. What I don't want to see is these like rocking up next season with just stasis as we were, because it's just not good enough. God forbid F1 fans around the world get exactly what they want, which is a close battle from race 1 to race 24. And these guys are still making these mistakes, because whilst they've got an opportunity here, don't sit on your hands, FIA. Whilst it's not close and whilst Max is running down the road and gapping everyone to the tune of 60 seconds, you have an opportunity to make meaningful changes, right? You should be testing things out, because it doesn't really matter. Do you know what I mean? Not for first, at least. You can do it now and nobody won't notice. And maybe that's what they're doing. But still, when Jonathan Wheatley's having conversations with the stewards, with the directors, and that's giving rise to potential amendments to the rules, that can't sit right with anybody. That's not, I just feel like we're just catapulted straight back to Abu Dhabi 21. It is the same scenario, peddlers. Anyway, that's it. I will end it there. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. Lando loves them. You guys are killing it, man. I hope you enjoy these. I'm going to try and start to do more of them. Not massive long ones, but just short bite-sized ones like this, race reviews. Anytime something pops up like Max Verstappen's incredible section 1 in qualifying yesterday, I got to talk to it. I kind of want to discuss it with you guys, David. Would you want a steward on F1? Fans are... You know what, David? The fans are toxic towards them, but I mean, the fans are toxic towards everyone, aren't they? Toxicity is another thing that you can't necessarily, as bad as it is in F1, I don't think there's a panacea. There's no legislation other than like education in schools, and F1's kind of not responsible for that, is it? I don't know. They can lip service re-race as one all they want to, but ultimately fans are going to rock up to the events and do what they do. If they want to burn flags and abuse and whatever, that's kind of, it speaks to ignorance and education and the lack thereof. I'm not sure it's F1's remit necessarily to deal with that, if I'm honest. But hey, I digress. Rayan, they're written away for... Oh my gosh, Rayan, you're killing me. Rayan says they're written in a way that teams can break them. You know what, Rayan? F1 has always been... I think this is the gift and the curse, right? F1 teams, they're the they're some of the brightest people in the sports world, in the world more broadly. So they're always going to want to flex the rules. They're always going to want to do the tax avoidance thing, right, as opposed to tax evasion. Flex and do a double diffuser or a blown off diffuser. Double diffuser was bronze, wasn't it, in 2009? Do a double diffuser type thing. Find a loophole in the rule that they can take advantage of. And that's the beauty to F1, but nevertheless, man, I'm not talking about those. I think those are always going to be those weird kind of technological loopholes that teams try and take advantage. They're always going to be in F1. There will always be a brilliant mind like Braun or a Newey that sees like a gap. That I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about basic things like, can we roll forward the bloody penalty? Or if we unretire the car, can we take the penalty hit today? Because people have retired the car. They're just breaking precedent, right? Logan Sargent's had a gazillion retirements. Is he going to roll forward his penalties? What happened previously? Are we going to set a precedent, or are we just making it up as we go along? I think it's the latter, guys and girls. But I digress. Right, guys, I'm going to go and get some life. Decent Suzuka Grand Prix with wide spreading ramifications for Mercedes. Going to be interesting to see. I would love to be a fly on the wall at their debrief, see how they communicate with each other, because it got techie. It got techie and it got marginal between Messrs Russell and Hamilton. And for my money, it's only going to continue to get techier and more marginal. Those two are going to come together. That train between two number one drivers is never late. Comrades, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Between now and next time, remember always to look but never stare. Peace.